Like many other games, damage in League of Legends comes in different forms. The purpose of this is to allow for a more multilateral experience. Done properly, the splitting of attributes greatly enhances a game's replayability and variety, but done poorly, and you run the risk of overcomplicating a game's mechanics and/or its balance, especially in competitive games. So most of the time, any title with more than one form of damage tends to break it into physical and magic, as is the case in League. Alongside that is a third form of damage called true damage. True to its name, it's damage that completely ignores the target's armor and magic resist, promising a set amount upon successfully landing. Early on, there weren't that many champions with the ability to deal true damage. I believe the first recorded instances were Cho'Gath, Master Yi, Corki, Twitch, and that's about it. Well, there was Nunu, but Consume couldn't be used against champions back then. Only 10% of the original 40 champions had true damage. If we fast forward to now, there's 162 playable champions as of Casante's release, and if we go through the current list of champions with true damage, 32 of them have some semblance of it in their kit. Although in terms of practical true damage, that number goes down to 28 since the list also includes stuff like Samira's Taunt, which does 1 true damage. Anyways, 28 out of 162 comes out to about 17%. But not only is the number of champions with true damage rising, but sources of true damage as well. Having talked about other pervasive mechanics like stealth, untargetability, mobility, healing, and shielding, I figure now is a good time to discuss true damage, as many of you responded to my community post on what feature you think was the worst thing ever implemented. So for today, let's discuss why true damage is out of control in League of Legends. As mentioned at the start, what distinguishes true damage from physical and magic is that there's no way the target can mitigate that damage, bypassing armor and magic resist to deal the exact amount of damage it was meant to do. If the attack does 300 damage, it will do 300 damage no matter what. True damage also ignores any form of damage mitigation such as Alistar's ultimate or damage reduction like exhaust. Moreover, it also ignores any form of damage amplification from sources like press the attack as well, so it works both ways. The only way for you to quote-unquote counter true damage is to stack health instead of armor or MR. Certain abilities are also able to nullify true damage like Pantheon's Aegis Assault or anything that can block attacks or abilities like Spell Shields or Jax's Counter-Strike. It's pretty much infinitely superior to physical and magic damage in just about every situation. It's not just champions who possess true damage though. Certain items, summoner spells, in-game buffs, and even runes can give any champion the ability to deal true damage. Probably the most notable one is the summoner spell Ignite, increasing a champion's kill power by dealing true damage over time while reducing enemy healing for the duration. Historically, true damage wasn't a common thing. Even within the champions that had them, their role was nowhere near as significant as it is today. For instance, Corki's old passive would cause his autos to deal 10% bonus true damage. Perhaps over the course of a game it would add up, but in a single fight it wasn't that much to worry about. Others like Twitch were kind of inconsequential. Deadly Venom's poison damage would only go up to 30 per second at level 17, and he would have to strike you 5 times to get that much. Anyone who possessed a significant amount of true damage didn't exactly garner a reputation for it. Olaf's Reckless Swing is a vital aspect of his gameplay, but for an ability of its type, there were plenty others that didn't do true damage that were far scarier. Up until I would say around 2014, Riot maintained their stance on true damage being a special thing and one that's not liberally distributed. 2014 was a watershed year, where champions ever since would be given increasingly more innovative designs, and with that came a penchant for attaching true damage to not just champions but everything. The first moment of controversy surrounding true damage was when Fiora got reworked in 2015, gaining a new passive that allowed her to deal % max health true damage to a target when struck from a set cardinal direction, and it wasn't a standalone ability like Olaf, nor was it a major finishing blow like Darius. True damage of that quantity would comprise the bulk of Fiora's entire gameplay. As for new champions, Camille was released in Preseason 7, bringing with her one of the most iconic and memed-on abilities to this day. Precision Protocol, a basic attack empowerment that did bonus physical damage and granted a movement speed buff. She could then recast the ability for free within the next 3.5 seconds with the same effect, but if she waits at least 1.5 seconds before doing so, the bonus damage is doubled and a portion of that gets converted into true damage, doing full true damage at level 16 onwards. Since Camille's Q modified her existing damage, that also makes this one of the few true damage abilities that can be amplified in power outside of its internal scaling. That includes stuff like Spellblade, Press the Attack, on-hit effects, and whatnot, being applied as physical damage but calculated as true damage. Precision Protocol became notorious for essentially being Cho'Gath's ult on a basic ability. From that point onwards, true damage has become a lot more prevalent. Many new releases would come with some form of true damage like Rek'Sai, Pyke, Sett, Zoe, Gwen, Bel'Veth, K'Sante, Yone, and Lilia to name a few. While some older champions would be given the same treatment. Garen's ultimate was converted from magic to true damage, same with Syndra, whose W Force of Will was given extra true damage, and Draven, whose ultimate executes targets based on his adoration stacks. Reworks to Urgot and Amumu allowed them to receive true damage too. True damage has become more accessible universally to allow mages and marksmen more agency against tanks. Kraken Slayer and Riftmaker were introduced to the mythic item system. There's also the new Hextech Dragon Soul this past year, allowing players to deal AoE true damage. Then we have runes like First Strike, giving burst champions a bit more oomph in their attacks. What was once a novelty concept has become a household name more or less, to the dismay of many players, myself included. Those of you who have been following me for a while know how much I detest max out true damage. I think it's one of the most unhealthy mechanics in the game and should never have become a thing, no matter the circumstances. This sentiment extends to regular true damage to a certain extent, but I should clarify that once again, just like all mechanics, it's not what they do but how they're implemented that can make them good or bad. There are 3 rules in my personal opinion that decide whether an element of true damage was well or poorly designed. Number 1. True damage should have a major cost or be conditional / not easily accessible to the user. When I say cost, I don't mean like a high mana cost, by the way. I'm referring to their power budget. You probably heard me bring this term up before, but to recap, a power budget is an arbitrary limit to how much a champion should be capable of doing. Obviously, this isn't uniform across all champions. I don't think anyone will argue Garen can do the same amount of things as Viego, but it's usually put in place to ensure one champion is not balanced on a different level than another. Anyways, if we want to make true damage a big deal for the champion, it should come at the cost of not being able to do as many things as a champion without, or it should be hard to access and not something available on demand. A good example of this is Darius. Noxian Guillotine hits you with an 18-wheel oil tanker semi-truck's worth of true damage, but he needs to accumulate stacks of hemorrhage to do so. Its base damage is quite awful otherwise, and it's intentionally kept in check by his means of applying bleed stacks. Darius is firstly very slow. He doesn't have any mobility or speed boost outside of Ghost. Furthermore, Decimate has a long cast time and is easily sidesteppable in neutral, while Crippling Strike is an auto-attack reset. Darius is a low base attack speed, so getting 5 stacks will take at least a few seconds, thus keeping his ultimate fairly balanced. In the opposite sense, Fiora's passive is far too accessible for how broken it is. Not only should % max out true damage just not exist because you straight up can't itemize against it, but it's so easy for her to get several vital hits off in a short period of time. All she has to do is attack you from one of 4 sides, yet she comes with a low-cost, low-cooldown dash that auto-targets vitals. She has 2 attacks that slow you, with one being an auto-attack reset that also crits on the second hit, and her ultimate instantly highlights 4 vitals. So in the late game, she can practically do your entire health bar's worth of true damage from just the vitals, let alone the normal physical damage from her attacks. It's true that Fiora's kit heavily revolves around striking vitals, but the problem isn't the design, it's that it's maxed out true damage. If instead she did physical damage and compensated her elsewhere, she would be far less aggravating to deal with. If they're adamant about designing a champion who did % maxed out true damage, it should be way more difficult to pull off than just hitting them from a certain side. Number 2. True damage should only be distributed to champions whose identity is defined by it. Vel'Koz would be a prime example of this. Organic deconstruction requires him to deal ability damage on a target 3 separate times for a burst of true damage. Even for an artillery mage, Vel'Koz's AP ratios are pretty low. His Void Rift and Tectonic Disruption only have 45 and 30% AP scaling respectively. Plasma Fission has 90%, but it used to be 60% not too long ago. That's because his win condition was designed around setting off organic deconstruction, once again tying back to the notion of being inaccessible right from the get-go. An example of an ability that breaks this rule is Bel'Vet's Endless Banquet. Her ultimate has a passive that deals bonus true damage every other hit, stacking infinitely so long as she attacks the same target. She just does true damage for free, along with all her other stuff, and no, don't tell me it's balanced by having low numbers. Bel'Vet has no attack speed cap and her Q can apply on-hit effects up to 5 times, so she does a lot more true damage than you think. The point is, it's just there for the sake of being there. Now before you go off on me in the comments, I'm fully aware of why this is here. As part of their narrative background, Void champions are known for dealing true damage. Cho'Gath, Kog'Maw, Rek'Sai, Vel'Koz, I get it. But in-game, there's no rhyme or reason for this to be in her kit. Like Fiora, her ultimate passive could have just done bonus physical damage and it would have been perfectly fine. Number 3. True damage should always follow reduced parameters compared to physical or magic damage. AP items give more ability power than AD items do attack damage on account of AD having more stats that resonate with it, as well as being the stat used for basic attacks. It's also why AP champs tend to have higher AP ratios like 80% plus compared to AD champions who rarely go that high for total AD ratios, only bonus AD. True damage should be even more reserved in this regard, whether in base damage or scaling. Ironically, K'Sante is a perfect example of this. While in All-Out stance, he deals % max out true damage on his passive, but the number is so minuscule that it makes up for probably not even 5 to 10% of his total damage output. In contrast, Camille's Precision Protocol does far too much. If it were merely the bonus damage from the ability itself, people wouldn't be as outraged by it. The fact that it converts all damage into true damage, including her normal AD plus Spellblade plus anything that could boost her damage, is what makes her so obnoxious. And it's on a 6-second cooldown with a 25 mana cost, and on a champion with 2 gap closers, one that has a max travel distance of 1600 units, and the other literally preventing her target from escaping. which is, supposed to be how melee champions with true damage are balanced. The problem is, for many modern champions, true damage is treated like normal AD or AP ratios despite completely bypassing armor and magic resist. Set's Haymaker can do well over 1000 true damage. Anyone with lower scaling is made up for by higher frequency like Gwen and Lilia. They do true damage as part of their normal wave clear or neutral, AoE true damage at that. Frankly speaking, even if a champion were to follow these rules very closely, that doesn't always mean they should have true damage to begin with. The issue we're facing right now is that true damage is so widely available that it almost defeats the purpose of having defense to begin with. The past 5 years have been dominated by the one-shot meta. Besides tank supports, there was hardly a reason to play a tank top lane or jungle anymore because you would get hacked to pieces by true damage everywhere. Squishy classes like mages or marksmen stood practically no chance in surviving against assassins and divers. Now, the durability update was the welcome addition to the game, but a few extra points of armor and health don't suddenly fix how many champions have true damage and how many global sources there are. Ignite, First Strike, Kraken Slayer, Redemption, Chilling and Challenging Spine, although that's gone as of Preseason 13, Riftmaker, Red Buff, Hextech Soul, Elder Drake, Collector, half of these didn't even exist 5 years ago, and at one point Conqueror even did true damage. The only explanation I can think of is that Riot wants new champions to stand out over old ones. Why does Set do true damage by taking damage? Because that's the only way Riot could think of setting him apart from someone like Trundle. Trundle is the OG tank buster for stealing stats, while Set's the new tank buster who footballs the enemy tank into their team then nukes them for 2000 true damage. What makes Fiora post-rework different from Jax? Fiora destroys everyone, not just auto-attackers. What makes Camille different from Vi? Camille can actually one-shot the AD carry. What makes Gwen different from Diana? Apart from being immune, she does true damage. That to me is what true damage feels like right now. It's just there for the sake of novelty, a lazy attempt at increasing their carry potential instead of finding a more creative way to give them more power. What bothers me is that the argument in defense of these true damage sources is that it takes skill to use them, like how Fiora has to attack from a certain side, or Set needs to aim his W properly. In a vacuum, that's true, except they also have ways to all but guarantee landing that true damage. Set can pull off a Facebreaker stunt to guarantee the sweet spot on Haymaker. Camille can prime her first Q, then hookshot into her target for the second one, or use her ultimate to lock them in place. Pyke can use his ultimate after stunning them. Meanwhile, a well-designed champion like Vel'Koz has to put in work if he wants to get a true damage ult off. He doesn't have an easy win button. And to make matters worse, it's appearing more on champions who really shouldn't have them. True damage was conceived primarily to shut down tanks. That's why most early sources of true damage were on marksmen like Vayne, Twitch, and Corki, or juggernauts like Garen, Olaf, and Darius. Also, alongside the rise of true damage came alternative forms of tank busting. We have runes like Cutdown, items like Lord Dominik's, Cerulda's Grudge, Void Staff, Black Cleaver, and Blade of the Ruined King as an answer for other classes. Fast rushdowns like Skirmishers really shouldn't have true damage, nor should divers or assassins. It's simply too easy for them to get on their target of interest. The more I think about it, percent health damage should have been in this discussion too. It feels like nowadays every champion does percent health damage, so itemizing health isn't even worth it anymore. And then you get games where half the enemy team does true damage and the other half does percent health damage, so you're screwed either way. Bottom line, they're being way too lax about who is allowed to have true damage. It should be a treat given to someone every so often, not something to overindulge in, as is the case for every abuse mechanic like dashes. That's all I have to say for today, so if you have any thoughts of your own on true damage, feel free to share them in the comments down below, as well as if you have any ideas on how to rework existing champions with true damage so that they're more healthy to go up against. But for now, if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Consider following my Twitter @Vars, joining my Discord server, and if you'd like to support the channel, check out my Patreon. By donating, you get access to benefits for all three of my channels, Vars, Vars2, and Vars3. Till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.